Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!
Welcome to Flat Earth Debate. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you're new to this channel, or you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support this channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there is also a PayPal link in the info box below the video once it's rendered. But most importantly, if you would like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the shape of the Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel. So please share the show. And one last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now we are joined by The Plain Truth, Ranty Flat Earth, and Sleeping Warrior. How the devil are you all?
Doing good. Doing good, doing good. How are you, Nath?
Very well, no complaints.
Brilliant.
Let's get down to business.
Let's do some housekeeping first and foremost. Any signs of curvature, gentlemen?
No.
Not an ounce of it.
Nope.
Nothing.
Nope.
That's keen. Any signs of axial rotation of the Earth-based variety?
Absolutely no evidence whatsoever.
There is no scientific proof whatsoever,
None whatsoever.
of any axial rotation of the Earth.
Any
Nary a
proof,
hint.
any proof of gravity?
Nothing.
What about a self-perpetuating molten iron core at the centre of a presupposed spherical Earth?
That would be a good one.
We would like some science for that. Does anybody know any science people that could perhaps answer that question, or indeed any of the housekeeping questions? That would be good.
Where else would the lava come from?
He calls himself SciManDan, but he doesn't really give us much science, so I don't think he's the right guy. But hey, I tell you something that's really cool. You know when these dumbasses say things like, yeah, show us the ice wall, moron. They think that that's a suitable slur to laugh at us for the idea that we think the Earth may not be a sphere. But when we say to them, show us the iron core, asshole, it doesn't quite have the same effect. They just dismiss that as though we're being unreasonable. You can't have it both ways, guys. If you want the ice wall, that's fine. But you've got to show us that iron core.
More housekeeping. What else have we got, Nath?
Where do we get to? Any proof of gravity?
No, we laughed at that one. We've done that.
We've
That's
done
fair
the
enough.
molten iron core as well.
Any evidence of the presupposition itself? Any evidence of Earth radius?
No evidence whatsoever of Earth radius.
What about a pressurized system?
I can
God.
see for miles and miles.
Fair enough. That's good to know. Any evidence of
Chocolate.
Turn you down a little bit, I think. Plain truth.
Sorry,
That's all right. Any evidence
I
of
just
gas?
got excited.
maybe a little bit more. Any evidence of gas pressure without a container?
Plain truth seems to be that naughty school child that sat at the back shouting out, hurling tomatoes from the crowd.
No. He would be the one getting tomatoes hurled at him if the crowd didn't like him, but we'll get onto that later.
Well, I went to the garage earlier and I asked them if I could have some pressurised air without the tyre. It took them about 10 minutes to actually realise exactly what I was trying to point out to them, that it is impossible.
Yeah, they don't get it. If you have the vacuum of space and you're looking at, like, say you're looking at what you would now build as the Earth, and you're going to put it far enough away that you can see all of it in your field of view, and then but you are in the apparent vacuum of space, how are you going to get a pressure to exist around that Earth without there being some kind of membrane? Because the vacuum of space is going to pull it off. Entropy, right? So what are you going to do? You need to have either a container or you need to have gravity. But either way, you've got to prove it. So we've either got gravity, which you can't prove, or we've got a container of some kind. And hey, what do you know? You can't prove that either. But one of them has to be true, and you can't prove gravity. But we do have a pressure.
Hold on. You don't have to debunk their counter-argument. You're not making that assertion. So who cares what is or isn't up there? It's irrelevant. They assert that it's an open system. So it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about what might be up there. It's irrelevant. It is an open system by definition if you are a heliocentrist. So that is the assertion that's... I'm nearly there. Come on, guys. That is the assertion that's being tested. So their assertion, if you're a globehead, you would assert that we're going to the moon, leaving Earth's atmosphere, right? Well, that's an open system. So, given that you, globehead, with the assertion, have an open system, how do you have gas pressure without a container? So it is a question directed to somebody making an assertion about Earth being a sphere that is an open system in a vacuum of space.
Bill Nye does say that we live in a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth.
Well, how did
you remember
they get to the moon?
Oh, yeah, except for that part.
Oh, right, I'll find it.
Yeah, but how did they get to the moon? If Bill Nye says it's a closed system... Oh, right, Bill. How are they getting to the moon then, sunshine?
All right, Nathan,
how did they go through the Van Allen belt?
Yeah, that's their bullshit. Hold on. Van Allen belt is their bullshit.
Exactly. They made it up, and then they realised they couldn't get through it.
Remember that Conspiracy Cats definitely told us all that we do live in an open system, because even Conspiracy Cats admits that we lose atoms. Well, I would say it's tons and tons and tons of, but we do lose atoms into space every single day, correct?
According to heliocentric bullshit.
So how does he explain this one then? Given that this is from Bill Nye, the science guy, we need to know what the explanation is, because somebody's telling us porkies. So what's going on here then, Conspiracy Cats?
Now, one thing I really want your generation to embrace is that the Earth is a closed system.
I think I've heard enough, Anthony. That's all we pretty much need.
Well, the next line he says is, there's no getting out of here. We cannot leave. So if,
go on, let's say that as well. Let's say that too. Sorry, I prematurely cut you off.
Place to go. The Earth is a closed system.
Oh, he repeats it. Should we play the Conspiracy Cats one again, where he says it's open?
No, but we know by definition, if matter is leaving, which they claim it is, they claim they're going to the moon, it's by definition an open system. I don't care what Bill Nye says. You can have your contradictory opinion about what Earth is. In the heliocentric system, you can escape. You're going to Mars, you've got satellites, you've got all of this crap that doesn't really happen. But that's what you claim happens. Therefore, open system, regardless of what Bill Nye says.
But Nathan, Bill Nye is the science guy.
Right, fair enough. Last housekeeping question. Any scientific evidence for the distance to the sun?
Nope.
Nope.
No. Oh, that reminds me. SciManDan. No SciManDan. No, SciManDan claims that he's done a video this morning, he's released it this morning, and he addresses the distance to the sun. Have you guys had the pleasure?
No.
Yeah,
I've had the misfortune.
So I'm going to go through this, but I think before we go through this, what I'd like to do is play the game that we started a couple of days ago, where basically it's called Spot the Assertion, or the Assumption.
Well,
so we'll spot the assumption
for the
by
record,
science.
though, the video is utter garbage.
Pardon?
Utter garbage. Has no science in it whatsoever.
Well, we'll come to that in a minute. So let's play Spot the Assumption. Get rid of that. Nathan, am I on screen, sir?
You're not, but you can be. Yeah, go ahead.
So here we have our astrophysicist friend that looks fresh out of high school, Eileen Perez, on this channel eHow, and let's spot the moment that she makes her next assumption. So she's in the video that's called Measuring Distances in Our Solar System and Universe. Let's see what she uses for science with the word measuring. We all know what measuring means, right? Let's see what she does.
It's measuring distance in the solar system and the universe. So here on Earth is handy to have kilometers, you can have miles, so this thing is 2 miles away. Now when you talk about anything like how far are you from the sun, kilometers become a little difficult, just because the distances become so great that the actual numbers become nearly impossible to memorize. They are no longer practical. So we come up with all these conversion factors that sort of put the numerical analysis of distances a little in perspective. So Earth and the Sun, they have a distance of 150 million kilometers.
Ding, 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 ding.
Go on.
Did she just not insert that value?
Yeah, that is the question. Where does she get the value from? But we're looking for the assumption. So let's play, because she hasn't quite got there yet, but it's coming.
Pretty far. And that's a hard distance to remember, especially because if you're going to start calling everything by this distance, oh, this is 2 times further than the Earth is from the Sun, then it becomes a difficult number to have as a reference unit. So this reference unit, we made it equal to 1 astronomical unit. So one.
And here we
ding,
have
ding,
it.
ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, this is the first point that the assumption starts to kick in, because we all know that this is the application of Kepler's third law on interplanetary motion, which states that everything is calculated in the units AU. This is how they got the relative term. They calculated the relative distances, which is fine, fair enough, we all get that. But nowhere does it put the measurements in it. But at this point, she's overlapping the two, and the question becomes, well, how do you know the 150 million kilometers if Kepler's third law gave us the proportionate relationship between the planets? Because where did the number come from? And basically, this is the point. So we all know that the minute they use AU, it means that they're applying Kepler's third law. We also know that Cassini and we know that Christine Huygens were the first two, according to some citations, to measure the distance to the Sun. But they assumed that Venus was the same size as Earth. That's a problem, because we don't know that that's true. And then they also base that on the presupposition that Earth has a size that they already know. That, again, is another presupposition. So it comes back to the application of the AU again. So basically, the rest of the film, though, the rest of the clip, we don't really need anymore. Nath, any comments?
No, that's pretty much par for the course, I would say.
So we'll get rid of her now, but check her out. She's got some good videos, but none of them are based on science, evidence, which I guess neatly and timely takes us on to SciManDan. What do you think, Nath? Should we go with that one?
Yeah. I mean, do you want to give a summary, or do you want me to give a summary before you launch into it? Or do you just want to launch into it?
You do the summary, Dave.
Say again, Ranty?
You do the summary.
Well, Anthony's put it together, so what, do you want me to, Anthony, or if you want to go straight into it, you can?
Let me open up SciManDan's video. Okay. So a few weeks back, he was on holiday, and I asked him, would he tell me what the current science is for the distance to the Sun? Now, as far as I can tell, it's going to be one of 2 answers. He's either going to use the Cassini-Huygens argument, which we've already addressed numerous times, or he's going to use the Venus argument with the radar, which has problems with it. But I wanted to know, what is the current science? Because this may not be the current science. And I was asking a genuine question. What is the distance to the Sun, and how do they know it? And he said he'd answer it. And he's gone back from his holiday, and he spent time on it. And to be fair, I'm going to give him a fair shout out. He spent time on the video, and he did correctly cite me. He did correctly play back the words that I actually said. Shut up. And he answered the question the best way that he could. And he wasn't being funny with it. He was being polite, and he was being practical with it. And he was, he's pretty. It was a fair attempt at being, answering the question. But what I want to do is play this little nugget of a clip. He uses a citation that he gives from a black and white video. And the only really important part in this video that we all need to observe is what the guy says at this point here. Now, bear in mind, the question that I asked SciManDan was, what is the current science for the distance to the Earth? Okay? So this is what this is the only thing you need to remember.
Distance to the Sun.
If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong.
Play it again.
If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong.
One last time.
If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong.
So as we all know, science is the observation and the experimentation of the natural world. Did I get that right, Nath?
Close enough.
So I asked him, what is the current science for the distance to the Sun? So we need to have some science for the distance to the Sun. And he doesn't give any. What he gives is the rhetoric. And I asked him for the science. Now, the closest that we got in the video was this bit where he says,
"That's because the light from the sun is parallel, and I can prove it."
Now, he's talking about how close or how far away the sun is. And he's basically preempting the fact that flat earthers will say, yeah, well, the maths works out both ways, which everybody now accepts that it does. But he's trying to remove that element by proving that the sun must be far away. It can't be close, right? Now, Nathan, do you want to give the disclaimer to this before we go any further?
Yeah, this is kind of pointless because, in essence, you've already summed it up. What we're after is science, experimentation, a valid hypothesis. That's what we're looking for. The science, not the mathematics. So to say, well, I can prove that sunlight is parallel, that's fascinating. Let's see your valid hypothesis. That's what we need. That's why you were asked. You claim to be SciManDan. So let's see some science, some formulated hypotheses, some actual experimentation to validate or invalidate that hypothesis. That's what we're after, SciManDan. Science! You buffoon.
So let's just play this clip one more time.
"That's because the light from the sun is parallel, and I can prove it."
So he makes the assertion that the light from the sun is parallel, and he can prove it. So what he then does is he thanks conspiracy cats for making this point for him. So really, he's not actually proving anything. Conspiracy cats is his citation, and that's what he's going to use to prove the distant sun. And this is his explanation, right? This is his proof, scientific proof of a distant sun, right? Convex lens. And then he talks about how when you get the convex lens, the light from the sun would not converge at a point if it wasn't parallel. Therefore, the sun must be distant and it must be very, very far away, not close. It cannot be close. The trouble is, if you get this picture that he cites to make the point and then flip it so that it's vertical, then what you do is zoom into it as though we see our atmosphere ourselves. This is how we see what we live in, right? If you're going to claim that the light rays that are hitting the convex lens that might be, 6 inches in diameter on the surface of the water there where you've got your A4 piece of paper, yeah, all of the light that hits that will be parallel regardless of whether it's close or far. And by close or far, I mean 3,000 miles or 93 million miles. Because relative to the size of the lens that you're using to make the point, the scale that you're using is disproportionately small. It's not in scale with the rest of what we see. You would need to get a convex lens that's the whole size of the horizon and focus it onto a piece of paper. But as we see that ourselves with our own two eyes, you don't need a lens to be able to do that. We can see it. So we can tell that all of the rays over the whole horizon that we observe are not vertical. They are vertical on a very small scale, but on a very big scale that we see, they're not vertical at all, SciManDan. So what you need to do on that point is basically apologize to your 50,000 subs and tell them that you misadvised them on scale. Because if you apply the correct scale that we see, we do not see a 6-inch diametered circle lens on an A4 piece of paper at this distance. We see all of the spectrum of light, whatever that spectrum of light is, be it parallel or not. So your answer does not prove a distant sun at all. And the reason why is because we see more than what you're showing. But in any event, even if that light was 3,000 miles away, you would still get parallel sun rays using the method that you've used because the scale. You've got the scale wrong, massively wrong. That's what we see real world. And you can tell that they are not parallel. It's not a perspective thing. They're not parallel. Perspective, all vertical lines are vertical. If it was parallel lines, the light rays from the sun would look like that. You would have the sun behind the cloud, and then all the light that was falling from the sun would be vertical. And it has to be that way because we know, according to the model, that all the sunlight hits the earth from the sun parallel. So if you're looking out towards the sun from your little grain of insignificant X stardust that we're told that we are, then it means that all of the light is coming through the atmosphere parallel to its source, not to the observer, to its source. So because it leaves the sun, all of it comes to Earth, parallel. That's not what you showed with your convex lens. Now, also, this isn't even science. This is just a demonstration, but it doesn't demonstrate the point that you claimed. So when we went back to this, there are two things to respond to this, SciManDan.
That's because the light from the sun is parallel, and I can prove it.
Firstly, you haven't proved anything. If anybody's proved something, it's conspiracy cats. You proved nothing. So that part of the assertion fails. But the other part is the light from the sun is parallel. No, it isn't. You haven't done it to the correct scale. On the scale that you've done it, yeah, I'll give you that. It's parallel, but it's not the right scale. And you know it. So correct the position, because you've just told 50,000 people that the light from the sun is parallel, but it isn't. You've got it wrong. Right. So that was that one. And his
up to now, Anthony, he's referenced why am I echoing?
Might be because I've got you on dead loud.
Right, okay.
Try that now.
Right. No, I'm still coming through.
It might be me. Try speaking now and I'll mute.
Right, that's better. No.
Is it? It might be because try it there. Try it now.
Hello. Yeah, I'm still echoing, mate. Right, you carry on.
It must be you then. I don't know why you're echoing. I don't think it's feedback from me because I've muted both my mic and my system sounds. But anyway, all right, I'll carry on. So the second point was, what is the current science for the distance to the sun? Now, this is where he's going to give us some science, because he is SciManDan. His name indicates that he's the science guy, right? Like Bill Nye. But we've just seen that Bill Nye tells us it's a closed system, but Conspiracy Cats tells us it's an open system. So I'm wondering, which science do we go with? Do we go with the science that tells us it's one? Or do we go with the science that tells us... I mean, I'm a bit confused. I don't quite know what to make of this. Anyway, he preempts that I'm going to make a point, or he reads a message that I've put on his video that preempts an issue, right? Which, it's glorious what he says here. Listen to what he says.
Well, 7 minutes is not really a long time when we're talking about movement along an orbit, especially one as big as ours.
So 7 minutes is not especially long time. Well, it is, because if you look at how much the distance has moved, this is where the science gets into it, SciManDan, and I kind of gave you a teaser as to what the issue is. Because if we are actually getting this information back by a ping, then the Earth has orbited around the sun in that 7 minutes. So from a time perspective, I would agree 7 minutes is not that long. But when you're moving, that 7 minutes means that you've covered some distance. So here's a thought experiment for you, to which I'm expecting you to be able to answer, because I'm stupid and I don't understand the scientific model, nor do I understand the heliocentric model. So you're going to have to explain this to me, right? The Earth's orbiting once every 24 hours. But the Earth's also, it's rotating on its axis once every 24 hours, but it's also orbiting the sun every year. But in that time period of 7 minutes, not only is it turning on its axis, it's actually moving its location. By how much, SciManDan? So that number is a big number. How are you going to get that signal back to you, even though it's only 7 minutes worth? In that 7 minutes, it's moved it's hundreds of miles. How is it going to get it back? So what he says is, I'm hoping I get that diagram that he shows. He shows a diagram where, there we go. So he presents a diagram where he pulses something from the Earth, and look at how much, there's only that little tiny bit that it's Venus, right? So that's the only bit that can come back. So the bit that comes back is subject to how much of it actually hits, right? But look at the size of the beacon that's coming back, right? And then for some reason, it seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger when it's coming back. But what's the wattage that's required to bounce a signal off something that's apparently so far away? There's another bit of science for you. We'll call it maths, because that's what we all understand it to be. It's not really science. But SciManDan, what signal wattage would be required to send a signal off from Earth, bounce it off Venus, and then receive the signal back? And then that assumes that you're in the same position when you get it back. Well, you're not, are you? You've physically moved around the orbit. And even if this little thing, this ping data, and it's only the ping data that hits the face that's perpendicular with where the signal was sent from. It's not the whole width of the planet. It's a very narrow window that comes back, because the rest of it gets bounced off into space and it misses the Earth. So we're only talking about the little ping data that comes back from the point that's perpendicular to the angle that it hits it. That's the only thing. So we haven't got this big massive one coming back. Again, it's a scale issue. But what's the wattage that's required to do it? But also, What's the evidence? Because I asked you for the science, and you haven't given any evidence whatsoever to answer the point. You've just given the rhetoric, which is exactly what I said you would do. What is the science, the evidence, not just the rhetoric, the evidence that shows a distant sun? And how did he get to it? You haven't answered the question. You haven't provided any science, no evidence, just rhetoric and a pretty little diagram. And you didn't even prove the distant sun. Conspiracy Cats did. And he got it wrong. So overall, no, SciManDan, you didn't answer the question. You gave me an answer, but you didn't give me any science. You didn't give me any evidence to support the science, and I still don't know how you got the distance.
Can I just
in summary, I'll go on, Ranty, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that we also require what the medium is that it's traveling through. So you need to provide scientific proof of this vacuum, because you say that this radar is sending a signal through the vacuum of space, through a different medium. Prove to us scientifically what the medium is, how fast it's traveling, etc., for you to get these distances.
Okay, well, I'm not necessarily going to agree with that, Ranty. He can do whatever he likes, so long as he gives us actual science. So he's claiming to be SciManDan. Science is what he claims to have, and at the beginning of his video, that's precisely what he says. So shouldn't be a problem, or words to that effect, was what he actually said. So, if it shouldn't be a problem to give us science, SciManDan, give us science. If you don't understand what science is, let us educate you.
Like Eleanor's just had a little fall there. Anthony, are you still there, mate?
Me?
Yes, you.
I've just literally come back.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, do you want to actually say what you think of his analysis? Do you think it was scientifically? Yeah.
I think the production of his video was like it did the best that he could to answer the question the best that he could. But he didn't actually answer the question. The question was, what is the current science for the distance to the sun? Not the rhetoric. I didn't ask for the rhetoric. I asked for the science. So what I'm expecting of him, if he's to give me some science, is to show me the actual experiment that was done, because the whole body of science, Nathan, is the standard that we're expecting, right? That's what we're laughed at when we ask for this kind of stuff. So I want to see the science with the evidence for the distance to the sun, right? It's not the rhetoric. I don't want to know the answer. I know the answer. I want to know what the proof is. Prove how they know the measured distance to the sun. Where did they get the number from? Because as far as I can tell, it's still based on Cassini, assuming that Venus was the same size as the sun. Well, you haven't gone any further than that.
There's a very simple reason why we're asking Dan for this. Dan claims to be a man of science. SciManDan. So, Dan, give us the science. If you're going to claim that some lens proves something to do with light rays, okay, no problem. Let's see your formulated scientific hypothesis for that assertion. If you're going to claim that radar proves the distance to the sun, no problem. Let's do it with science, sunshine. Give us your formulated hypothesis for that assertion. Let's see your systematic experimentation to prove your claim, to prove your assumption. Let's see the science for it. Don't assert it and then show us mathematics, Mathematic Man Dan. We want the science from you. If we wanted the mathematics, we'd go to Charles. We'd ask Flat Earth Math, because he's got the word math in his name. You've got Sci, presumably for science, and at the beginning of your video you said science shouldn't be a problem, then you gave none. Zero, nada, zip, absolutely no science whatsoever. So Dan, give me any formulated hypothesis followed by systematic experimentation for any of the assertions you make in your video where you claim falsely to be giving us science. You're not. If you think you're giving us science, you don't know what science is.
Yeah, I think you misspoke as well, Anthony. You said Cassini assumed that we were the same size as the sun. I think you meant to say the same size as Venus.
Yeah, sorry, was I being asked a question?
Yeah, I'm just saying that you misspoke before. You actually said that Cassini had said that the Earth was the same size as the sun. I think you meant to say Venus.
Let me just clarify. If I misspoke and got something slightly wrong, let me clarify. Cassini was the one that did the parallax of Mars. Christian Huygens was the one that made the assumption regarding the size of Venus to be the same size as Earth. Based on Cassini's work, based on Huygens' work, Cassini then used that information, although he didn't credit him for it, so it's not clear that he actually did, but they worked in the same building on the same work. But the point is that Cassini basically, from what it appears, according to the... Should I get the citation up, Nathan? We'll read it. Because I want to be clear on this so that people don't misquote me, because bear with me.
You rejoining on Skype or something? What's happening? Everyone's gone quiet. Has the show been sniped?
No,
I'm still here.
I'm here.
Anson's vanished. I don't know if he's trying to rejoin on Skype or something.
No, he's just gone looking for a quote. Essentially.
Right.
While we got a second, I just want to say shout out to Travis for that interview you did. Watched it. It's good, man. I like how you deal with these guys on that cognitive dissonance level. It's hard with them. But it was a real good interview, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I listened to it this morning, and I remember
Put yourself on mute.
I got a phone call that came in. I remember while I was doing the interview, I had things in my mind that I wanted to bring up and talk about, and then they would just talk for so long, and then I would forget what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. So, but it was good.
It's like you're starting at the basic 101 level, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a little rough because we get into such detail on this show, and then you go somewhere else, and it's like, but why can't satellites and so I commend you for that.
I tried a couple of times to say, look, I don't really want to talk about outer space. I want to talk about where we're at. Let's talk about the Earth. Let's keep it right here, because for me, the issue is water. I mean, that's the thing you got to debunk right there. Debunk that, buddy.
Yeah. It's like they don't want to talk about that. You have to talk about NASA because we have pictures.
And now with JT and his infrared, we've got, debunk all that land.
Yeah. Have fun with that, guys. By the way, nobody won the 10,000 yet? Oh. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Should have been 1.5 hours, in my opinion, but okay.
Yeah, it's a done deal.
Yeah. You would think, right?
Chat's asking you 10 grand for what? Can you just explain what you mean? There's obviously people that don't know what you're on about.
Oh, the $10,000 baller challenge, where damn, I can never remember the guy's name. Jay DeCascus or something like that. I could be misspeaking, but he's got a challenge out there to anybody who can prove the shape of the Earth and the spin of the Earth. And all you have to do is provide, verifiable, repeatable evidence that, there's a curvature and there's a spin. It will give you $10,000. I mean, I don't know. The whole thing seems legit to me. I don't know. I haven't done hard research into it, but I mean, it's out there. So it's been out there for a few days now. So I would figure if we live on a ball and that's been proven, as so many people believe, that should have been won in a half hour, maybe an hour, maybe a day. It's been 2-3 days now. I don't think anybody's attempted it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just for the audience, the platform I was on was called the Dogma Debate with David Smalley. So he's got a pretty broad panel of guests that he brings in, topics and whatnot. So.
Is that you, Anthony?
Yeah, did I kick myself?
I think you must.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Hang on, let me get rid of these. Let me work out where the noise is coming from. There it is. Yeah, I didn't realize that I'd kicked myself. So obviously mid-sentence, I've shut the window that I was on accidentally and then not realized.
Well, you're back now. That's what matters.
Oh, I feel all loved.
Yay.
I can't remember what I was even saying. What was the last thing I said?
You were going to get a citation.
Pardon?
The citation?
Yeah, should I bring up the citation, Nate? That's what I said, isn't it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right, let's do this with a fresh window so I don't accidentally pull myself off the window that I was in. I need this one. Right, this is the best citation I found, and this is because there's not that. The problem is there's not that many of them, and they're buried deep within documents. And there are other citations that say that other people got the distance to the sun. But this is the one I'm using because this is the one that Jimmy, somebody called Jimmy, the liar that he is, brought up. And it's the only one that I've ever heard any baller cite. So I'm using that one because that's what was cited back to me. Anyway, in this document, it reads, astronomical history books tell us that the first observations came from Mars by Cassini. There was, however, a determination in 1659 by Huygens that is both ingenious and accurate and which deserves to be better known. Okay, so that's why I'm citing it, because it deserves to be better known, apparently. And Huygens wanted to give the sizes of these objects that he knew. Okay, let me get back to the bit. Huygens wanted to give the size of these objects because he knew that the objects all existed, and he knew that there was a parallax issue because he applied Kepler's third law on interplanetary motion.
When you say objects, you mean lights in the sky?
He knew that there were lights in the sky, and he knew that they followed a pattern, and he applied Kepler's third law on interplanetary motion, which gives us the one astronomical unit. We mention it often. But Huygens wanted to give the sizes of these objects relative to the size of Earth. He knew the relative distances of the planets, but in order to convert his angular measurements into Earth diameters, he needed to find the distance from the Earth to the Sun in Earth diameters. Huygens solved this problem with an assumption. If he supposed that the planet Venus had the same size as Earth, he could then calculate the distance in Earth diameters from his measurement of its angular size. Well, that's all well and good if Venus is actually a tangible object that we can land rockets on, and if it happens to be the same size as Earth, which in itself is a presupposition that we know how big it is because we presuppose there is a radius. So if you're going to accept that there is a radius to the Earth, which for this purpose that we're going to have to do it for now, we'll have to kind of demonstrate the point. If you then accept Venus is the same size as the sun, if you then accept that Venus is the same size as the Earth, then yes, the solar system will scale itself out the way we're told. But what happens if you don't assume that and try and prove it? Which is my question to SciManDan. How do you prove the distance to the sun? Now, he did address this, but he said, what's the current science? And I did ask that question, what is the current science? And he gave radar measurements to Venus.
Sorry, that's not science. Sorry, let's just get that absolutely clear. That's not science.
Correct. That was the question that I asked, what is the current science? But I just wanted to contrast with what I said about Cassini, because towards the bottom, it says 14 years later, Cassini in France, assisted by Picard and Romer, and somebody else, measured the parallax of Mars and could then find the length of the astronomical unit without any assumption about the sizes of the planet. Cassini derived the size of the solar system and described his results in 2 papers, without any reference to Huygens. Cassini's value for the astronomical unit was 11,000 diameters in the earlier paper. Since Huygens and Cassini were working in the same scientific institute, they could scarcely have been ignorant of one another's work. So what that's basically doing is kind of
inferring, isn't it?
It's kind of saying that he used his assumption with Venus, but not saying it. So it's kind of tipping the cap towards it, but not actually saying that he used it. But I'm going to say that he did use it because that seems to be what's happened. They're both in the same institute. They will both know of each other's work. And unless somebody can prove how they did it, actually, if it's not that method, how did they do it, SciManDan? How did Huygens and Cassini measure the distance to the sun if that's the way. And if they didn't do it, which we know they didn't, then what's the current science? Science is the word, and you haven't given any science. What you've given me is rhetoric, a story. Makes sense logically. Where's the proof? So show me the science for the distance to the sun. You haven't done that. You have given an answer. I don't accept your answer. All you've told me is a story. And a story, as good as it may be, isn't science. SciManDan. Do you understand? So perhaps the next question should be, tell us that you understand what science is before you answer the question. Because I don't think you understand what science is according to the definitions of science, SciManDan. What is the current science for the distance to the sun? Really, really clear.
Yes, so for that we would need things like a hypothesis, systematic experimentation, proof, based on science. That's what science is, not maths, Dan. Yeah, clearly there's a few people in the chat that are the same. Prove maths isn't science. Oh right, bonehead. Yes, those are two different things, two different words. They're different. If you don't understand that maths isn't science, then you're as stupid as Dan.
Yeah, maths is a description with numbers. Look up the definition, what mathematics is. But then look up the definition of what evidence is. Then look at what the definition of proof is. Then look up the definition of what scientific proof is. And I asked Dan, what is the science for the distance to the sun? It's a very narrow, specific, it's awkward. But if there was science for the distance to the sun, and there's supposed to be the whole body of science, Nathan, then it shouldn't be that hard to pluck it out because it's a commonly asked question. But where is the science? I don't want the story. I want to see the science, Dan. Do you understand? Because all the people in chat now are probably laughing at me saying, I don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm asking for a narrow point. It's a very specific piece of information, to quote Arwin. It's specific within the scientific method of science. And I'm asking you to prove the distance to the sun. Can you do it or not? And you said you could. And I'm even allowing you to assume R. Well, show us that radius.
You may.
Well, no, not really. Show us that distance. Show us how science has proven the distance to the sun. I don't want the story.
Should we redo housekeeping for the new guests?
No, we'll do it on the next show. We've only got 20 minutes left on this show, and then we'll have a break, probably a little bit less. So we will do housekeeping again on the beginning of the next one.
Okay, fair enough.
I think we've kind of addressed SciManDan really clear. You haven't answered the question. Does anybody disagree with the way I've presented my counter to SciManDan in terms of, did I get something wrong? Did I miss something?
No, it's very simple. You've asked for science. The reason you've approached SciManDan is because he claims to have science. At the beginning of his video, he said, science, no problem. To paraphrase what he said, shouldn't be a problem to have science. Okay, well, great, let's have it then. That would mean we want actual scientific evidence, with a formulated hypothesis, with an alternative and a null hypothesis, systematic experimentation to back your presumption, all of those things. Science, in other words, Dan, that's what we're asking. That's why we came to you, my friend. You've got Sci in your channel name. Presumably that means science. Based on the affirmation you gave at the beginning of your video, science, no problem. I can only assume that does mean you think you're scientific. Well, let's have some of that then. Let's have some of the science. Post a hypothesis for anything you asserted in your video. Show the systematic experimentation that backed anything you gave in your video. You won't, because it didn't. It wasn't science. You didn't give us a scrap of science, not one scrap.
Oh, we did for the proximity of the sun. He got a convex lens out that
I'm sorry,
took credit for initially.
Anthony, can you repeat for me his hypothesis for that?
Well, he didn't give a hypothesis, Nathan.
Oh, right. Well, could you give me the independent variable he was using?
Well, he speculated that... no, he didn't give one, Nathan, no.
What about the systematic experimentation? Did he show systematic experimentation?
But Nathan, he's SciManDan.
Sorry, did he show systematic experimentation or not?
No, Nathan.
So not science then? Definitely not science then?
No, but he did show us a lens.
Oh, did he show a lens? I thought he showed a picture
of a well and a stick.
So no, he showed us a lens. But yeah, you're right. He did show us. So really, SciManDan, you didn't show us any science. Telling us a story a logical one that all it may be, isn't science. It's a story, right?
Body of science.
Sorry, according to Rumpus, no need for an experiment. Can you screen cap that? Nathan, you moron. One can quote science and use science without performing experimentation. Can you just go back to that little clip, Anthony? Can you join us back on Skype just for the end of the show?
I can.
So once we get Anthony back, we're going to play a little bit of SciManDan's video that he cited. Great, give you a couple of minutes. We've got about a quarter of an hour left. So, but if you can bring up that citation from the black and white video that guy had.
I'm on it. Screen share and sound. So we're looking for the black and white clip, correct?
Yeah, please. Just that one line that the guy says.
So for the benefit of Rumpus in chat, who claims the whole body of science, Nathan, let's just hear what this guy says.
No sound.
Oh. It's really hit and miss, that. Okay, let's try this. So for the benefit of the Rumpus in chat.
If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong.
It needs an experiment.
Yeah, he says if it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. So experimentation, that is the main purpose, to test your hypothesis, to validate or invalidate the hypothesis. Science is experiment driven. Hypothesis is just a prediction that's untested. So to just come up with a hypothesis and say, there you go, there's my proof. No, that's an untested prediction, an untested scientific prediction, if formulated correctly. You absolutely require systematic experimentation to validate or invalidate a hypothesis. That's what we're asking Dan for. A hypothesis, scientific experimentation to go along with it, to validate or invalidate his hypotheses that he may put forward, but hasn't. He's given us none of those things. SciManDan is scientifically illiterate. He doesn't understand what science is. He literally didn't present a scrap of science.
And I have to wonder whether the Rumpus understands what science is too. Are you deliberately, stretching the boundaries of the meaning of the word science to try and include stuff that you know damn well doesn't fall within that definition? Or are you just thick?
He goes on about scientific discoveries is the Rumpus.
So no problem. If they're a discovery that's been performed with science, then they will have quotable, citable, systematic experimentation to back their assertion. Now, I'm not saying Dan has to do the experiment, but he has to show me what his experimentation he's relying upon is. So I don't have to do a double slit experiment to cite the double slit experiment. Yeah? That's not necessary. I don't have to actually perform the test. I have to show that it's gone through the systematic experimentation to validate or invalidate the hypotheses. It's simple. I'm not asking him to do any experiments, but he's actually got to cite some with a hypothesis attached. He hasn't. Simple.
Because that would be the whole body of science, Nathan, wouldn't it? It should be at his fingertips. Where is the science for the distance to the sun? And just to read the question that Gleam Mac says, the Rumpus, where did the mileage come from? And that's the question that I'm asking. Where does that number come from? And if it still comes from Huygens and the assumption that Venus is the same size as Earth, then you guys cannot prove the distance to the sun, because it relies on the assumption that we have the radius, which obviously we've already established by numerous people, Mick West from Metabunk website, for example, that is an assumption. So if they're going to base the assumption on an assumption, what actually can you guys prove?
So again, back to the Rumpus. He's saying he's quoting the results of experimentation, then no problem, Rumpus. If he's quoting experimentation results, then he can also quote the hypothesis that went with them, can't he?
Yeah, the other thing, Rumpus, he says, you were asking SciManDan for his hypothesis. He doesn't need to present a hypothesis for an experiment. He can quote results of experiments. Well, I asked him for the science for the distance to the sun. And he didn't give us any science. He gave us a story. As good as the story may be, where is the science?
Let's
Where's
just
the
get clear
evidence?
what an experiment is. An experiment is a hypothesis test. So to assert that you don't need a hypothesis is ludicrous. It's a hypothesis test.
I don't think Rumpus actually knows what science is. I think Rumpus struggles with the distinction between two different things. One of them is science that we're asking for, and Rumpus is talking about something else completely. And I don't think Rumpus knows what he's talking about, or is deliberately trying to obfuscate this point because we are relying and asking for where does that 93 million come from? Does it come from radar? If it does, show us it. Where's the test? Who did it? When did they do it? How did they do it? Let's see the science. That's what I'm asking for. Can't you science, Rumpus?
If you want to call radar an experiment, then an experiment is a hypothesis test. So let's see the hypothesis for this radar. If that's the experiment, let's see the hypothesis for that, Rumpus. Right now, post the hypothesis for this radar experiment.
Rumpus can't post anything like that. He's been on numerous times and he is illiterate when it comes to posting a hypothesis. He tried to do it, like, when was it? Maybe 2 weeks ago? And he made the most garbled, gish gallop nonsense that a 6-year-old could achieve better than. And he laughs at us. I don't think that's fair, Rumpus. I don't think you're talking any science here. I think you're talking rhetoric, which is not what I asked for.
Why is this important, Anthony? Why is this one of housekeeping questions important when we're asking SciManDan about it?
Because the housekeeping questions are not supported by this whole body of science, Nathan, that Rumpus quotes. There is no evidence or proof of a distance to the sun, whatever the sun is or is not. We can't even ascertain whether the sun is a tangible object or not. The sun could in fact be a concentration of light focused in a particular area, and it gives us this 360-degree light that we get. I don't know what the sun is. I admit I cannot prove that it's a sphere of a hydrogen helium fusion radiation, whatever you want to describe it in science. I want to know how you got the distance to it. And as far as I can tell, and I'm not being funny, it seems to be based on the assumption, and the radar, it seems to be a modern day take on it with no evidence to support its truth. Might be wrong, but I'm still asking the question because I've been asking this question for a long time, and I've been asking this question numerous times. And when I had the conversation with GeoStreamer on angular size, the distance to the sun came in that conversation, because you can't triangulate unless you know its actual size, and you don't know its actual size, because to know its actual size, you need to know its distance, but you don't know its distance, so you need to know its actual size. But you don't know that. So everything's circular. So yeah, I accept that Kepler's third law gives us a relative scale, right? I accept that. Makes sense. Prove the distances. Who measured what? How did they do it? And when did they do it? And where's the evidence for it? Science. Where's the evidence of your science, please? And it doesn't seem to exist. Is that making me a moron? We all know the number 93. 93 million miles, 150 million kilometers. We know those figures. They roll off the tongue. We all learnt them.
Sorry, according to Billy Joe Jim Bob, we know the distance with effing radar, you skunt. Right. Well, we approached Dan because we wanted the science for that. So if that's the science, then let's see the formulated scientific hypothesis. Let's see the systematic experimentation. Let's see the science for that, Billy Bob dickhead.
So the Rumpus states, Riley, you don't understand angular size. Oh, let me pause that before it goes off the screen. Distance is proved by making parallax from two observations at a known distance apart. Right, so are you going to assume that we're on a sphere for that, Rumpus? Or are you going to assume that we're on a flat plane? Because it matters. If you make the assumption that we're on a sphere, you're assuming R. If you don't make the assumption that we're on a sphere, then you get totally different answers. So which is it? You know the distance, so are you going to apply a sphere to it, Rumpus? Why would you do that without evidence to prove that it is a sphere, which is the point of this show? Where's all this body of science proving the simpler things? And I want to compare and contrast to other shows where they do hangouts and they go down very narrow corridors and they talk about things that are so nonsensical but support the idea of heliocentricity. We stick to the simple things that are assumed and believed. Well, where's the evidence that they're true? Come on, it's not that difficult. Why is it that it's months and months and months and nobody can give us what the science is, what the evidence is to prove that 93 million miles? Simple. Come on.
Anthony, what year is it, mate?
What year is it right now?
Yes. What year is it?
2018.
Okay. So what references into which time frames did he reference for his science when we're looking for the modern scientific way of measuring the distance to the sun? What was what experiments and proof did he bring to the table? In what year were these things done?
None.
Who?
None.
SciManDan.
None.
Yes.
He hasn't brought any experiments. If he's called them experiments, then I want them to be validated by the hypothesis that was put in place to test in the first place. Experiments are an expression of a hypothesis. So if he's got an experiment, I want to see the hypothesis. That's why I asked the chat, where's his hypothesis? If these are experiments, give me the hypothesis. An experiment's a hypothesis test, therefore it must have a hypothesis. If it's just some nonsense, then it won't. That's what I'm asserting. It's just some nonsense, not science. Otherwise, you'd be able to dig out the hypothesis.
Isn't that also then, wouldn't that lead to the experiment not having any basis because you don't know what the experiment is trying to address or prove?
Say that again.
If you don't have a hypothesis, your experiment is meaningless because you don't know what you're trying to address or prove.
Well, if you don't have a hypothesis, you don't have an experiment. An experiment is a hypothesis test.
Right.
And that's science. And the question that I asked him was, what is the current science for the distance to the sun?
And he referenced, what did he reference?
He referenced Venus and the radar.
Yes. And also to the year 2000 or 2000 years ago, when some guy stuck a stick in the sand, and we have radar and we have a convex lens. So that's what he brought to the table for his scientific proof of the distance to the sun. It's the year 2018.
Yeah, but let's remember, saying that they did it with radar is one thing, right? But as Brenda would say, saying something's bullshit doesn't make it so. Well, I'm going to call bullshit. Because unless you prove that they actually can do this with radar, then it's just a story. It makes sense, it's logical, and I can believe it. But does it make it true?
Well, that's the systematic experimentation part of the scientific method. So just asserting that you can measure it with radar, well, no. If you're going to claim that you can prove it with science, first show your formulated scientific hypothesis, then show your systematic experimentation validating or invalidating that hypothesis. That would be science. That's what we're asking for, and that's something we haven't got. Not from SciManDan, anyway.
So we're going to get the last
word. We're going to round out for about a 10-minute break shortly, so does anybody want to get the last word in before we do so?
Yeah, we have a problem. What's the standard of evidence that we should accept?
Scientific evidence. Scientific evidence.
Not stories.
Not stories, scientific evidence. Hypotheses, backed Nathan, by systematic experimentation. That's the standard. If the globeheads think science backs them, so I want science. If somebody like SciManDan claims to have science, he's our first port of call. If I wanted a maths explanation, I'd go to Charles Flat Earth Math. That's why he's got the word math in his YouTube name. SciManDan has got science in his YouTube name. That's a given. That's what SciBit in his SciManDan name means. So if he's claiming to have science, give me some science.
I guess you can round out.
Cool. Anybody else on the panel got anything to add before we do so? Nope. We didn't talk about Travis. I will do that before we round out. So, oh no, we did talk about Travis. No, I think that's probably it then. Nobody else?
That was seamless, that, Nath. Well done.
Yeah, slick.
Back in 10 minutes, though, yeah?
Yeah, back in 10 minutes. Okay, so with that, I will say, first and foremost, a huge, massive, enormous thank you to all of the debating panel for making this debate possible. And, of course, a massive thank you to all of the live audience for tuning in and hopefully sharing this debate. If you hated the show, SciManDan, then you know exactly what to do. But if you like the show, maybe consider sharing it with a friend or subscribing if you've not done so already. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.
Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!